One of the things I like about being a creator is the idea of leaving a legacy. That after I die while saving some kids from a burning orphanage, from a fire that I intentionally started so I could rescue them so I have a bigger legacy, my presence will live on through my content, being watched by aliens in their hovercars in the early 3000s as they think, wow, the first Earth was really weird. I imagine many game developers agree with my sentiment, give or take a few details, but what happens when you make a game, release it to millions of people, and then it disappears? This is the bizarre phenomenon of lost media. Of course, this most commonly occurs with digital releases, which are lost in three ways. Dun 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 dun! Some games can only be played by downloading them from a digital store, but usually due to some sort of licensing issue, they're eventually removed, meaning if you didn't buy them when they were available, there's now no way to access them without sucking many people. Probably the most infamous examples of this are Flappy Bird, a mobile app that was removed because the creator didn't like the fame it brought him, totally relate to that one man, and PT, a demo of a cancelled horror game by the creator of Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes, Hideo Kojima. Dun 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 dun! Digital games are also lost when the digital store itself shuts down. Being a weather enthusiast just hasn't been the same since the loss of the Wii Weather Channel. The example I want to talk about here is one that's almost completely forgotten. There's almost nothing about this on the internet. So here in the UK, our main TV provider is, unfortunately, Sky, which, for all of you gun owners out there, is our equivalent of TiVo. From, to 2015, Sky had a game service built into the TV set that you would play with your remote control. If you hated the N64 controller, then damn, you Americans must be really glad we didn't beat you now. There are a lot of notable exclusives on this service, including an exclusive Tomb Raider game that, because they didn't have the power to rip off Indiana Jones like usual, ripped off Prince of Persia instead. There were a ton of licensed games based on properties of Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, etc. There was even a Coronation Street game, Existence is Agony! This is a huge part of gaming history in the UK. If you showed this image to anyone with teeth problems, they'd be hit with a ton of nostalgia. Also, because the service was so technically limited and thus easy to make games for, many indie developers started and made their name making games for it, at a time when releasing indie games on a major platform was typically more difficult. Some studios made 10 plus games a year. Who needs quality over quantity when you have money? Because these games were only available on the fucking television, they're now completely lost to time. One of the biggest parts of UK and indie gaming history, gone forever outside of some screenshots, VHS tape recordings, typo-filled lists online, and vague memories in the head of this man, Jesus Christ. Dun 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 dun. The final digital related way games are lost are when a game's servers are shut down. For example, Battleborn, gaming's next big thing according to 2015, is a multiplayer only game that's having its server shut down. The game isn't technically lost because you can still find physical copies and download it if you already bought it, but it's essentially lost because the gameplay will be inaccessible, rendering it worthless unless looking at the box art was the most valuable part of the game to you. That's why I don't consider it a lost game. In a similar vein, there's been many games that could only be accessed via a website, which became inaccessible after the site was closed. I've talked about this before, please watch that video after this one, it's one of my best works, but it used to be super common for an entertainment product to be promoted with a Flash website filled with loads of games based on them. For example, there was a weird ass promotional thing called Crash Bandicoot and Spyro Adventure World, featuring a bunch of exclusive Crash and Spyro games that, due to the site being shut, are now lost outside of these screenshots. Speaking of Crash, remember when he had those horrible tribal tattoos and how the one silver lining to this was that it only appeared in 2 games? Well, here's a third game, Crash Village, an online MMO with tattooed Crash, that is now unplayable because the server shut down. I guess lost video games are a good thing. Moving on from digital games though, the type of lost media I find most intriguing is physical games. How does a game get put on a disc, sent to thousands of retailers worldwide, get bought and brought home to thousands of households, and then disappear anyway? That's just incompetence more than anything. Most of these games released when the internet sucked ass, so they were never documented online, leading to many wondering if they even existed in the first place. The most notorious example is this game, which I'm not saying because this is actually a racial slur in the UK. Lost video games are fun! The only proof this game ever existed is this box art, which could have easily been photoshopped, and the fact is mentioned in official articles. But considering the developers are notoriously a shady studio best known for ripping off Disney, like with this beloved classic Snow White and the 7 Clever Boys, I did not make that up, even this is sketchy. This mystery around the games is what makes this phenomenon so fascinating to me, and what makes the games so fascinating to me. Like, Mean Girls on Nintendo DS, another lost game, is not a game I would usually care about, and if it's found, is almost definitely just gonna be some disappointing minigame collection. But dude, I must brush Regina's hair though. There's also lost versions of games. For example, Maya the Bee on Game Boy Color. Don't leave, this leads somewhere, I swear. Elite hackers discovered in the ROM of this all-time classic that it was originally South Park themed, but was changed into because the creators felt a South Park game wasn't suitable for a system aimed at children. And then there's Rockstar. This original version was eventually found and released online in 2018, 19 years later. And that's probably the most satisfying part of this phenomenon, when a lost game is found. For example, Rayman Garden, also known as Why the Fuck Does This Exist, was only ever released on some obscure ass phone in Japan, so unsurprisingly, it went missing. But some people online tracked the phone down and sure enough, the game was still pre-installed on it, thus allowing them to upload it online and preserve this highly important part of Rayman history. Probably the most unique case of a found game is Saints Row Undercover. This is a cancelled PSP game, the existence of which was only ever rumoured, but in 2016, the developers themselves decided to make the unfinished prototype available online for free. I love this because it shows the developers clearly recognise the value of game preservation, and it's a sentiment that's luckily starting to grow more and more. For example, Crash Twinsanity, a game notorious for having as much cut content as it does glitches. This remains one of the biggest what ifs in gaming history for many people, because due to it being really rushed, huge chunks of the game were removed just because they didn't have the time to implement it in a way that wasn't completely broken, although I guess that didn't stop them with the rest of the game. So there's numerous lost versions of the game, but the head of the development studio has since uploaded some of the lost content on their YouTube channel, thus finally preserving the different versions of the game that people had speculated about for years. And of course, the infamous Half-Life 3, anticipated for years, teased for years, cancelled, but then finally made available online as a script, god damn it. There's also lost games that never directly released but saw the light of day in a different way. For example, Rayman 4 was meant to be the sequel to Rayman 3, believe it or not, but at some point in development was turned into a spin-off party game, because God is a woman and she is a bitch. At the same time, there were versions of Rayman 4 being developed for Nintendo DS, Game Boy Advance and Weapons of Mass Destruction, and these versions of the game never saw the drastic change in direction the main version did. So, while they were released as raving rabbits for marketing purposes, these are basically ports of Rayman 4. Many of the story beats and gameplay mechanics planned for 4 that would have otherwise been lost to time ended up being released in a roundabout way. Like a really run down shit roundabout, but yeah. Same situation with the cancelled Star Wars Battlefront 3, which was, why did I say it like that? Which was dumbed down a bit and released as a PSP entry called Elite Squadron, and now we understand why it was cancelled. Similar to the all-time classic Maya the Bee and South Park situation, this also occurs outside the franchises. To use a phrase I've used 10 million times this video, for example, there was gonna be a new Crash Team Racing game in 2010, but it was cancelled. However, it was ultimately reworked and released as DreamWorks Superstar Karts, with a Z. And now we understand why it was cancelled. So in conclusion, the world of lost video games remains one of the most fascinating parts of gaming history to me. A video game is an incredibly personal thing, both for the creators and the players. For the creators, it's an expression of who they are at that point in their lives. For the players, it's an experience that can mold who they are at that point in their lives. So when a video game is lost, a part of a person is lost too. For example, gameplay of one of my favourite games from that Sky TV service finally resurfaced online recently, and watching the footage and hearing the sound effects unlocked so many memories that would have never returned if this wasn't preserved. Now think of all the memories that are lost forever because they're tied to games that no longer exist. Luckily, it seems to be becoming a thing of the past thanks to the importance of game preservation becoming more and more recognised. The aforementioned developer examples, a couple of those Sky TV games have been brought back as mobile apps, and because you now have to play them with a touchscreen, they're horrible to control, just like they were on the TV remote. It's amazing! Plus, there's a ton of fan efforts, like the preservation of online Flash games. So ironically, while the future is usually uncertain, this world that is all about uncertainty seems to have an increasingly certain future. And that's pretty great. Dun 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 dun. No 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 no. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. No 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 no.